Okay, options set mode. As you know, there's a number of different options that can be set on this unit, and we set the desired options using the options set mode. So as for all the modes except normal running mode, we need to make sure that switch number 1 is in the on position, which is to the right, so that when we apply power to the module, it powers up in operating mode select menu. We then use button number 1 to select the desired mode, which I've just gone past it, so I'm going to have to cycle round. We want options mode. Once it's displaying the desired mode, we push button number 2 to go into this mode. So we're now in options set mode, and this display here displays the first of the several options that can be set. In each case, we push button number 1 to cycle through the different options. The first option is whether we want the speedo to be set up to a Canadian calibration, which is kilometres, also used in Europe, or a US calibration, that is miles, also used in the UK. So we use button number 1 to cycle between the two options. This unit's set up for kilometres, and when it's displaying the required value, we push button number 2 to advance to the next option. The next option is the coolant temperature sensor. Do we want it to display degrees Celsius, or by pushing button number 1, the alternative option, degrees Fahrenheit. In our case, we want Celsius, because this is for a customer in Europe. Button number 2 advances to the next option. Do we want the fuel to be displayed in litres or gallons? Those are the two options, litres or gallons. When it's displaying the desired value, we push button number 2 to advance to the next option. This option, BG1, is what we want the function of bar gauge number 1 to be. By default it's set to coolant temperature sensor, but if we use button number 1, we can see we have several options. Bar gauge number 1 can be the fuel gauge, or it can display this supply voltage, or it can go into a show mode. In our case, we'll keep the default coolant temperature sensor. Next option, bar gauge number 2. By default it's the fuel gauge, but we can have it display supply, voltage, or show mode, or coolant temperature sensor, but we'll keep it with fuel gauge. Button number 2 to show the next option. Do we want these red-green indicators to be functional, or the alternative option to go into a show mode? If they're not wired up, you might just want to use them in show mode so that they randomly flicker, or they change. So functional or show mode. In our case, we'll keep them functional. That's the last of the options in this version of software. So the final display is, do we want it to store, yes or no? In our case, no, we won't store the changes. So that's been cancelled. And we finally get the option to go straight back into normal running mode. Push button number 2 and we go into normal running mode. That is options set mode.